Thank you so much. Thank you for your invitation, Alexander, and thank you for all of you. I hope you can hear me. Everything is fine. It's just you do like this. I can see that it's okay. It's all fine. Okay, good. Thank you. So, what I will try to do is to take maybe 30 minutes just as an introduction to Islam and some of the things that are necessary. And then I think the most important part will be your questions and trying to have a dialogue in some of the issues. And I know that what is happening today in the Netherlands, but also in other European countries, raise some questions as to the living together for now and for the future. So a few months ago, I was called by Penguin, the publisher, and they were telling me we need an introduction to Islam because, in fact, we try to find one, and there is no such a thing like a comprehensive introduction to Islam. So I decided to write Islam the Essentials. And what I did in order to be able to address both audiences, the Muslims and people of other faiths or with no faith, I asked Caroline, my assistant at Oxford University, to think about a table of content. What would she like to get in a book introducing her to Islam? And in fact, the table of content was thought by her, and even a section at the end where she said that it could be interesting to have 10 things that you thought you knew about Islam. And this is what I did. 10 things that I am addressing that you may think that you know about Islam, but in fact, they might be a misconception. So, having said that, what I think it's necessary when it comes to understand Islam, the first problem that we have when we enter in the universe of reference of the other, when we enter Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism, what is very important is to get a clear or better understanding of some of the key concepts that are used in the religion. And we have a first problem with Islam is that very often, and you had somebody, Ayani Shiali, who was living in the Netherlands, who wrote a book called Submission. And in fact, submission was for her the translation of Islam. And very often we think that the meaning of Islam is submission. In fact, it's wrong. When you know the Arabic language, you understand that Islam has nothing to do with submission. The very meaning of Islam has two main roots. The first one is salam, and salam means peace. And the second is that what we should do with our heart and with our mind, the spiritual journey towards God is to try to enter in God's peace. You have a verse in the Quran which states, enter in God's peace with all your being, all your heart, all your mind. So, in fact, the very meaning of Islam is to try, through our spiritual education, to enter in God's peace, and peace is one of the name of God. His name is Salam, and the name of the paradise is Salam, is peace, the abode of peace. And when two Muslims are meeting one another, they say, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. Meaning that everything has to do with the notion of peace in Islam and as to the main principle. There is another concept which is problematic in our understanding of Sharia. Very often, when the people think about Sharia, they think about the penal code, cutting hands, and stoning and things like this. In fact, the very meaning of Sharia means, the literal meaning is the way towards the source of water. So Sharia, it's a way where you try to find the source of everything. So Sharia, in fact, doesn't mean the legal framework. These are some jurists who translated Sharia by this because this was their field, and some reduced it to the penal code. And this is not only coming from Orientalists or from people who are not Muslims. Even some Muslims are reducing Sharia to the penal code. For example, Daesh or ISIL, the the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria or in Nigeria, Boko Haram, they are reducing implementing Sharia by implementing a distorted understanding of the penal code. In fact, Sharia is the way towards faithfulness. And the way towards faithfulness is how am I going to go to or to move on to history to try to remain faithful to the principles that I find in the Quran while I am living in new context and a new environment. So it's an ongoing process, is the way towards faithfulness, meaning in order to be faithful when time is changing and space are diverse, how am I going to make my mind to find the best way to implement the same old principles in a new environment? So, in fact, in the light of Sharia, there is no faithfulness to the principles if there is no evolution in our understanding. We should acknowledge the fact that there is a human agency in our understanding of the text, because the two sets of text on which all the Muslims agree, Sunni and Shia, is the Quran, the very word of God, and the prophetic traditions, what the Prophet of Islam said or did or approved. So, having said this, there is a second word here which is problematic in our understanding, which has nothing to do with the penal code. And for example, if I am a Dutch citizen, and the Dutch citizen or the Dutch legal framework is saying all the human beings are equal before law, which is a right principle. This is my Sharia. This is the right principle. It should not be thought by Muslims. It should not be. It should not be thought by Muslims. It should not only be produced by Muslim scholars. As long as it's right, you should take it. Because there is a saying in Islam, wisdom is the lost property of the Muslim, and he should take it or she should take it from wherever she or he finds it. Meaning that equality before law, that's my Sharia. So when the people are saying, oh, Sharia, it's an alien principle or alien frame from the West, is wrong. Sharia means try to find the right way to implement the right principles wherever you are. And there is a third concept, which is also very important because we see it every day and day in, day out in all the media and the headlines, is jihad. And some people are translating jihad into holy war. It has nothing to do with holy war. And in some concepts, if you want to get the right meaning, you should come to the spiritual understanding of them and to understand in which way this has to be implemented externally or socially. In fact, all of us, and you with me, we all know that inside ourselves, in our heart, in our being, we have contradictory tensions and contradictory aspirations. We like transparency, we like truth, and we like freedom and generosity. But at the same time, we know that inside our heart, we could be selfish, we could have a big ego, and we could like money and power. So our natural state is not to be at peace with ourselves, is to be in tension. What we need to do is to educate ourselves in order to master the dark side of our identity in order to promote the right side, the enlightened side. This process of mastering the self and resisting the bad in ourselves is called jihad. Is how am I mastering the self in order to become a better Muslim? So in jihad there are two movements. One is to resist the bad, and the second is to reform for the good. So what I'm doing with my heart, this is what I should do in society. So when I am attacked, when the people are attacking me, I have the right to resist and to reform for the good. So jihad is not a call for war. In fact, jihad is to master the tension in order to promote peace. It's the way towards peace, not the way towards war. So you can understand here that the jihadists in Iraq and in Syria are distorting the very meaning of jihad by killing innocent people and doing things that are completely against the principles of Islam. So as you can see, what we need to do if we want to be serious about dialogue and living together, we need to get a better understanding of the terminology that is used. Now, having said that, what I'm also doing in the book and what I think it's very important when it comes to a religion, we need to know more about history. So the history of Islam is not only a history of people killing innocent civilians like it is in Iraq and in Syria. We have a very long history and civilization where we had what are known as the golden ages of Islam, where Muslims were promoting sciences, were promoting arts, were promoting architecture. If you go now to Andalusia or if you go to Istanbul, you can see that Muslims were promoting this. And it's very important for us to get this understanding. Why? Because we have to get rid of this essentialization of Islam as we are essentializing Christianity by saying, oh, Islam is what it is now. No, Muslims today are facing a deep spiritual crisis and a crisis with it. But it doesn't mean that Islam is only this. There was a great contribution of Islam to all the civilizations. And when I'm a European Muslim, when the people are telling me, you are not really European because you are Muslim and Islam is alien to the European culture. It's wrong. If you study philosophy, if you study sciences, you can see that Muslims contributed a great deal about rationality in the West, about philosophy, about architecture, about sciences, medicine, experimental sciences, in all these fields, from mathematics to uh, to experimental science and biology and architecture, you can find a contribution. So I think that this is also something which is important. The sense of history, it's important because it shows when you go through the history of Islam that this binary understanding, Islam on one side and the West on the other side, is completely caricatural. It's completely simplistic. It never happened in history. There is lots of the West within the Islamic tradition, and there is a lot from Islam in the Western tradition. So we are already intertwined in the way we deal with our identity. And I have no problem as a European Muslim to be at the same time completely and fully Muslim and completely fully European. So that's the second point, which is important, the sense of history. And I would like to tell you the truth that because I keep on repeating that that one of the main problems that I have in the West is not that the people don't know Islam and they don't like Muslim. It's very often that the people I'm dealing with, they don't even know about their own religion. They don't know about Christianity. They don't know about Judaism. They are ignoring their own history. So if you are not at peace with your own self, how are you going to be at peace with others? Others are going to be perceived as threats because they know who they are, or at least you have the perception, we have the perception that they know who they are and they are threatening our own doubts and our own lack of confidence. So this is the second point. There is now a third point which is important, is that people you don't really understand how do we deal with Muslims, which type of Muslims do you have? And as you know, something that came to the Netherlands or came to the French colonization or came to also the British colonization, very often when the colonizers went to Muslim majority countries, they had a way of dealing with Muslims by saying, you know what, there are two types of Muslims, the good and the bad. Who are the good? The good Muslims are the Muslims who are collaborating with the colonizers, and the bad Muslims were the resistance, and that's it. And today we still have this binary vision, simplistic binary vision, saying we have moderate Muslims and fundamentalists, extremists. And I think that this is a colonial mind. Islam and Muslims are much more complicated than this. And I think it's very important for you as much as for me, if we respect the other, if we want to enter into a true dialogue, we need to acknowledge the fact that the other is as complex as we are. I have studied Judaism, I have studied Christianity and Buddhism. I traveled a great deal. I went to spend months with the Dalai Lama. I went to spend time with priests in Brazil, liberation theologians, and I know how complex Christianity is. There is not only one trance. one trend within Islam. It's much more complex than only having Catholic and Protestant. Within the Protestant tradition and within the Catholic tradition, you have lots of different ways of positioning or theological position. And I think that this is to be understood. It's exactly the same in Islam. So let me tell you a sense, and I hope that just after I finish this description, you will say, oh, it's complicated. If you think it's complicated, I got my point. Uh, by saying what? You have, for example, at the highest level, you have the Sunni and the Shia. First, there was a difference that was political, and then it ended up being a theological difference between the Sunni and the Shia. And there is a third trend that is not very known, but if you travel to Zanzibar or if you travel to Oman, you will find people called Ibadit. And it's 1% of the Muslims around the world. So you have 85% of Sunni, 14% of Shia, and 1% of Ibad. These are the Muslims around the world. And then within every group, you have schools of law. You have, for the time being, between 4 and 5 schools of law in the Sunni, 3 in the Shia tradition, and 1 in the Ibadi tradition. And then you have schools of thought. You enter and you are in touch with Muslims, and you see that there are some who are dealing with philosophy, others with mysticism, others with the legal tradition, and you have schools of thought that are producing a kind of a comprehensive approach within a specific discipline. And then you have trends and currents. For example, you have literalists, you have traditionalists, you have reformists. I'm myself a reformist. I'm coming from the reformist trend. So I'm not representing all the Muslims. And some of the literalists, they even think that I am not a true Muslim. And ISIL puts me in 2 videos as somebody who is even more dangerous than non-Muslims because I'm distorting Islam from within. So they put me in a list in a video, and I even got Scotland Yard coming to me and saying, "Do you want to be protected?" Because what they are saying is that I'm distorting Islam. So as we can see, I'm not representing all the Muslims, but it's one of the trends. So you have the literalists, the traditionalists, the reformists, the rationalists, the Sufi, the mystical tradition, and these are trends. So you can see many levels and different trends. Add to this that you live in the Netherlands, and what you have today is European Muslims by culture, as you have African Muslims by culture, and you have Arab Muslims in different cultures. So we have a diversity of culture with the same Islam. But the way the Muslims are living in African countries is not the same as the way Muslims are living in Europe, for example. It's even more complex than this. If today you meet with a Dutch Muslim and you try to put him or her in touch with a French Muslim, they feel that their culture is not the same. So now you have Dutch Muslims by religion, and Dutch by culture. I'm a Swiss by culture, and at the same time a Muslim. So we have a diversity of cultures, and this is something which is very important. So this is something also which is important. I spoke about history. Now I spoke about diversity. Let me add something which is very important in our understanding of Islam today, is that the end of the book is dealing with contemporary challenges. And there are challenges for Muslims living in Muslim majority countries and challenges for Muslims living as minorities. And the problem that we have with Muslims living in Muslim majority countries are many levels. We have many levels. The first thing that we have is the way Muslims are reading the scriptural source. Some are reading them in a very literalist way. And the problem that we have today is that it happens in Muslim majority countries as it happened in the West. This is a transversal, it's crossing the board channel. And very often I'm saying to our governments, the Dutch government, but also the French, the German, the British governments, the American government, is we have to be cautious with whom we are in touch and who we are supporting. Because we are supporting some Gulf states, for example, Saudi Arabia, because they have money and they have oil and they have resources. But they are supporting a very literalist way of reading the scriptural sources. And this is a problem. If you read the text in a very literalist way, you are not going to adapt to understand the context within which this has to be understood. So this is one problem, it's the reading of the text. And I think that it's important for us to have a reformist approach. I wrote a book called Radical Reform, meaning we have to change our way of dealing. We have a second problem, which is again crossing the board in Muslim majority countries and in the West, which is this confusion between religion and culture. Why? Because we have religious principles, but we have also cultural realities. And we need to understand that sometimes the way scholars in the past were dealing with the scriptural sources was not with the source themselves, but through the culture that they had. And very often they were dealing with patriarchal culture, where the male were interpreting the text, where men had the upper hand within the society. So coming from there, we have a problem, yes, in the way the scriptural sources were interpreted, for example, in the way they were dealing with women. So when the people are saying, oh, Muslims have a problem with women, I'm saying, look, Islam has no problem with women, but Muslims have, but not because of the text, very often because of their interpretations and because of their culture. Because these are patriarchal cultures, and we have to be critical towards the patriarchal culture in order to come to the deep meaning of the text, speaking about equality, speaking about women autonomy, and this is something which is important. So these are some of the problems that we have crossing the board. In Muslim majority countries, yes, we have problems. We have a crisis of authority. Today, who is speaking for Muslims? Who is the voice? We don't have voices, and very often people are saying, you have to condemn the terrorist attacks and all this, and we do, and I think that there is a great consensus. Unfortunately, very often it's not very much heard by the media and by the politicians, but it's very important to hear that Muslims are condemning, but we don't have a central authority. And this is a blessing, or at least is understood by Muslims as a blessing. But I would say here that what is important is to get a better understanding and a better institutional structure where this institutional structure could also bring Muslims together and to have voices, or one voice with a diversity of scholars coming together to say something. And there is a crisis of authority, which is also something that we find, for example, in the Netherlands, or we find in European countries. At the national level, we need the people to come and coming from diverse background and diverse currents, as I was talking about currents. You need to have literalists, and you have traditionalists and reformists and rationalists and Sufi, be able to come together and to say something together, because they agree on so many issues that we need to have a kind of consensus of some of the main issues, like, for example, terrorism or violent extremism. There is a problem also Muslim in the West, Muslims as in the Muslim majority countries, which is the democratization and freedom of the people. There is a lack of freedom for the great majority of the people within the society, and that's very important to understand that there will be no future if there is no freedom. In the West, we have the problem of citizenship, and now what we are seeing, this is what I call the silent revolution. For the last 30 years, we had European Muslims being citizens and now being much more involved and visible within the Western societies and the European societies. And that's something which is positive per se. It will take time. We still have, in the book that I wrote, what I believe, I'm saying that we need 2 generations, and this is a long historical process to be part of the society and to contribute. And I'm saying to Muslims, you have to stop talking about integration, and we need now to start talking about contribution. What is the added value of your presence within the society? And what we also have to deal with is the identity. And I think that we have to be very cautious with this business of identity and having negative identity, the Western identity versus the Islamic identity. We all have multiple identities and open identities. It's moving. And I think that this is something which is very important. This is also part of the challenge. to end my talk and to give you the floor with questions, I think that within this presentation, what I also tried to when I was presenting this book or writing this book is make sure that I'm also touching all the controversial issues. And this is important. Why? Because there are, very often when I come to the media, 95% of my presence in the media is to say what Islam is not. Islam is not terrorism, it's not violence, it's not discrimination towards women, it's not. And at the end, we have no space to say what Islam is, the spiritual dimension, the reality of loving God, the reality of this spiritual education, being with God, giving the people, serving the people, saying that the very message of Islam is loving God, being loved by God, and trying to serve humanity. This is the very essence of Islam. But we are not talking about this because this doesn't make news, it doesn't make headlines. What is making headlines is killing, it's violence, it's the negative aspect. And very often we have to talk, and there is a list of controversial issues that Muslims very often have to talk about. First, it's violence. Second, it's women, and then the headscarf, and then homosexuality, and all this. What I did in the book is for all this, I decided to tackle them, but not in the way the media are tackling them, in the way from within, as Muslims, we have to tackle the issue. So I came with the whole comprehensive presentation of Islam, and when it was necessary, I did tackle all these controversial issues and to try to make it clear, to a better understanding of what our answers and our understanding could be from within the Islamic tradition. That's it. I hope that it's quite clear that you got some of the main points, and we can go for your questions as it is. Thank you so much.